All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for attending this morning. I know it was a short week for most of you, and we will try and sort of breeze through and get you the information you need. So this is the LDD training, our quarterly training for September, and we're just gonna jump right in here. Quick agenda. I'll have the MBRC staff that are on the call today just unmute and introduce themselves quickly. And then I'll briefly go over the capacity work, which most of you should be aware of at this point. I'll do a quick overview of some programmatic updates, and then we'll jump into the meat of today's presentation. Rich unfortunately couldn't be here this morning. He got double booked, so he graciously recorded himself presenting his slides, so he's here in spirit. And then Jonathan's gonna talk to us about procurement, and then we'll finish up with a quick listening session and just a reminder of the resources that we have for you all. So John, do you mind just unmuting and introducing yourself, and then Sarah?
Sure thing. Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm John O'Rourke. You've probably seen me around or seen some emails from me here and again. I'm a program specialist here at the MBRC, and we'll be going through procurement today. And good morning, and thanks for joining us.
Sarah Demers. I am the program coordinator here at MBRC. I'm relatively new. I joined earlier this spring. And if you were on the last LDD training, you saw me here as well. And you may see some communication from me on projects related to NEPA or other things as well. I help out where I can. Good to see you all today.
Thank you both. All right, just a brief overview, which again, like I mentioned, you should all pretty much be aware of this at this point. But this training is part of our growing LDD partnership program. This partnership program is really about intentional relationship building with our partners to ensure local capacity and equitable access to our programs. And through sort of these trainings and sort of stronger relationships, we're really hoping that both MBRC and LDDs are going to be held sort of accountable to this higher standard for our applicants, with special attention to those historically underserved communities. So as you all know, phase one was the opt-in process, which is why you're all here, because your LDD has opted in. And by opting in, that means you've agreed to attend these mandatory quarterly trainings. The LDD is listed on our website as an LDD resource, and you are agreeing to help maintain capacity in your community through MBRC programs. And then phase two are these quarterly trainings, where we really just cover, and go more in depth into these sticking points on topics that you've asked for, or we've felt that there needs to be sort of more in-depth discussion about. Hence BABAA and procurement today. Again, these are the trainings. We're here at the September training, and just to note that this is in addition to the new grantee training, which is coming up at the end of September, not required for LDDs, however, very much encourage you all to attend. And if information about that hasn't gone out yet, it will very shortly. And then December, we'll have another quarterly training discussing the various forms across all our programs, and sort of covering the points about those forms that seem to cause issues for grantees. Just brief updates about some of our programs. FEP, I know you guys heard about this last time at the July training. There is $7 million in funding, and after the spring awards, so we decided to do 2 grant rounds for FEP. After the spring awards, there's about $4.4 million left for this fall round coming up. So for the spring round, 17 LOIs were received. There were 6 projects invited to apply, 5 decided to apply, and 3 projects were awarded. And here you can see on the screen the timeline for that fall application period. And if you have any specific questions about FEP, feel free to send an email to admin@nbrc.gov. Marina is our FEP queen, and she will be sure to answer any questions you have about that. And as a reminder, grantees who are awarded FEP money aren't required to use an LDD. However, we highly suggest that they reach out for assistance because you guys are really great resources. Catalyst program, as you all know, we just finished our application and awards for 2023. Each state had about 11 million, which is way more than we have in the past, which is fabulous. There were 187 applications received this year. And you see our timeline here. Awards, notice of awards went out at the end of August. That new grantee training will happen late September. And we'll be issuing grant agreements in the next couple of months here. And then this is just a brief overview of what the applications look like. If you attend the new grantee training, Adrian will go way more in depth into this. But essentially, there were 66 awards of those 187 applications. And you can see here it's broken out by state. And lastly, the timeline here. The timeline might shift a little bit for this round, but again, it'll be covered in much more depth in that new grantee training. So I just want to pause here, see if anyone has any questions. Feel free to type in the chat or use the raise hand function. I don't know where my my screen went with all your faces on it, so I can only see the participant list. So if you could please just use the raise hand or type in the chat, we can potentially answer any questions you have about those programmatic updates. And if not, we can move on. Fred?
Hi. Sorry if I don't recall this correctly, but at the July training, you covered NEPA, right?
Correct.
And was that slide deck sent out?
I believe it was. I can be sure to send that to you directly. If you feel like you didn't receive it, I can send it out again.
Yeah, I was just looking for it and I couldn't find it. So I'm sure it's here somewhere, but yes.
I'll send it again.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, no problem. Anyone else? Okay. And again, any sort of very specific questions about Catalyst, please attend that new grantee training happening at the end of September. You'll get way more information at that training about Catalyst. Okay. Like I mentioned, Rich couldn't be here, so he recorded his presentation. I'm going to go ahead and hit play. John, if you could just let me know if you can't hear anything, but we did test it out, so it should be good. And if you have any questions, Rich is really the know-it-all about BABAA, if there is such thing. So if you do have specific questions, we ask that you just type them into the chat so that we can have record of those questions. And what we'll do is have Rich take a look at those and get you answers. But I think there are still a lot of unanswered questions on our end about BABAA, but we'll do obviously the best we can to get you responses to those questions. So again, throughout his little presentation, please just put questions in the chat and we'll be sure that Rich receives those and provides answers. Okay, here we go. Takes a few seconds to warm up here.
Good morning. My name is Rich Grogan, and I'm the Executive Director here at the NBRC. I'm sorry I can't be with you all today on the meeting. I'm on the road, but Sarah graciously let me record my comments for the presentation in this format so that I could be here in spirit. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Build America, Buy America today, which is affectionately known as BABAA. If you haven't heard much about this act, you certainly will, as it will ultimately apply to all federally funded infrastructure and construction projects nationwide. I want to say at the outset that there are still some things we don't know about how OMB will define certain terms, more on that later, and even at the MBRC about how specifically this will impact all of our grantees. We do have an open channel of communication to the Made in America office in the federal government. So if questions come up along the way, please don't hesitate to reach out. We want to offer the best guidance we can to our grantees and partners, but also we unfortunately right now are still doing this in a little bit of an environment of uncertainty, and I'll talk about some of that uncertainty later on. So with all that said, here's an overview of BABAA and how it applies to MBRC grantees. As you can see on the slide, the Build America, Buy America Act was enacted in November of 2021. It was part of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or bipartisan infrastructure legislations known by a couple different names. But the act set forth a domestic content procurement preference, which is known as the BAP, or the Buy American Preference, for infrastructure programs funded with federal dollars. So it applies to iron and steel, manufactured products, and construction materials used for infrastructure projects under a federal grant award. Importantly, it does not just apply to the MBRC, but any grant projects that are funded for construction using federal taxpayer dollars. So this will be applicable across any federal awards. The federal agencies are required to ensure that none of the funds made available for a federal financial assistance program can be obligated unless all of the materials listed here, manufactured products, iron and steel, and construction materials, are produced in the United States. There's some information here about a general applicability waiver. I'm going to talk about waivers specifically later, but just want folks to know that you may hear waivers in a couple of different contexts when you hear about or think about BABAA. One is a general applicability waiver, which several federal agencies applied for and received, NBRC among them. The purpose of that waiver, which was for 6 months and which expired earlier in 2023, was to help us have conversations with federal agencies, understand how other folks are doing things, and think a little bit more about our internal procedures. So we'll come back to that during the waiver portion of the presentation. In terms of definitions, this is where there's still a little bit of uncertainty. And again, I'm going to reference that a little bit later, but just want to be upfront here and talk about infrastructure in particular. In the context of BABAA, you can read the slide. It covers a lot. And it covers all of the infrastructure items that the MBRC funds for the most part. I think the important thing to understand from the Act itself is that we, being federal agencies, are required to take a pretty expansive view of infrastructure when we think about to what BABAA applies. And so you can see also that BABAA specifically called out electrical vehicle charging as infrastructure as well. There are some areas that the MBRC in the 2023 Catalyst program defined as infrastructures that you may not see here. We are supporting the funding of some childcare institutions, as well as outdoor recreation facilities, et cetera. However, when those grants tip into construction materials, et cetera, pretty clear that we are required to follow BABAA provisions. So let's talk about what specifically is included in the Buy America preference. Iron and steel, pretty self-explanatory. It's a little bit murkier when you move into bullets 2 and 3. So you can read this section on manufactured products. Clearly, they're wanting more than 55% of the total cost of all components in a manufactured product to be made in the United States. You may have heard of this called a domestic content provision if you read about BABAA in like the popular press or something like that. And I think this is a recognition that with most any product, it's going to be difficult to find 100% of those materials made in the United States. But clearly the challenge is going to be how you define manufactured products. And so I'm going to get to that in just a second. Similar road for construction materials. There are all construction materials should be manufactured in the United States. And this means that all manufacturing processes for these materials occur in the United States. We're still waiting for a final ruling on what specifically the Office of Management and Budget, who is leading this initiative in terms of these definitions, how they will define manufactured products and construction materials. In the slide, you will see a hyperlink for construction materials. And if it doesn't translate for some reason in the recording, I'll make sure that Sarah has a copy of the link so she can share it out with you all. But this is a link to the Federal Register, so you can see, specifically how the Office of Management and Budget is thinking about defining construction materials. There's an ongoing period of public comment that's onboarding suggestions for how to think about that definition. So a little bit of a ongoing process there. Now, the bit that gets a little more complicated, but also I think is something that we're probably going to use quite a bit once we get rolling on this. And that is waivers. And I talked about waivers a few minutes ago with respect to a general applicability waiver for the MBRC. But waivers are the things we get the most questions about at MBRC. So I want to spend a few minutes talking about them. As I said earlier, I referenced a general applicability waiver, which the MBRC sought and received last year, and you may have seen it posted on our website. We had a special tab dedicated to this program. And the general applicability waiver gave us 6 months to better understand the law, to consider it, and determine how we would enact it across our programs. So we use this time to talk to other federal agencies, the other commissions in the country, our attorney. We discussed it internally, and that's all gotten us to where we are today. But this slide in particular is talking about a different type of waiver. These are waivers that can be issued on a project-by-project basis. So any agency head, which for the NBRC is our federal co-chair, on a project-by-project basis is able to grant a waiver for a project based on the conditions seen on this slide. We anticipate relying most heavily on the second and third bullets, as the public interest waiver is not very well defined yet. I don't want to go too far down the road of speculation, but I can foresee that a waiver like this might be considered if, for example, a project is unable to move forward because of BABAA. That's the kind of thing that we would take seriously as being in the public interest, because the public has an interest in the project going forward. But we're going to have to put some more quantitative screws to that, I think. Unfortunately, we'll have to find our footing around the rationales for this as we go. I know that's not a satisfying answer, but it is all I have to offer at present, especially while there's, excuse me, rulemaking still ongoing. Regarding the second and third bullets, non-availability and unreasonable cost, I think on its face, we all have a sense of what these mean. But we will have to work together to ensure that each of these conditions is well documented. According to our conversations with the Made in America office, they're going to want to see that we've documented a procurement process that made a good faith effort to satisfy the law's requirements. So that's going to look a little different for different projects. And based on a town or an organization's procurement process, and certainly we have an interest in allowing some flexibility therein, because different entities define their procurement process differently. But at the end of the day, we all need to feel good about the effort that we put into trying to comply. Because I mentioned the Made in America office here, I also should say that granting a waiver is a little bit of a process. So I want to prepare everybody for that. Once we have documented the need for a waiver, our federal co-chair then will agree to grant the waiver. After that, it has to be posted publicly for 15 days on our website to offer a chance for public comment. And then it has to be approved by the Made in America office. The Made in America office, I will say, has been working hard to staff up. They're telling us that their approval can happen in 10 business days, which feels a little fast to me for them, but we'll see. And I assume that as more and more agencies are applying, there's going to be some facility gains on their part in terms of efficiency. But I just want to prepare everybody on this call for the potential for delays based on these additional steps. And the last thing I want to highlight on this slide is that responsibility for waivers and for BABAA compliance more generally is down to the largest federal funder in a project. So that largest federal funder in a project is considered the cognizant agency for Made in America. Those of you who've worked with federal awards for a while are very familiar with the cognizant agency language, but this is specific to the Made in America law. And so based on the number of MBRC projects that include other federal funders as part of the capital stack, we anticipate that this provision will apply certainly to a good portion of MBRC projects in the region. And finally, next steps, MBRC will work working closely with grantees and LDDs to identify projects that must adhere to BABAA requirements to ensure that provisions are considered during procurement activities. We'll be coordinating with grantees and LDDs to identify areas where it may be appropriate to grant waivers. And you're going to hear more from us going forward in terms of, we anticipate doing like a one-pager FAQ document to be used as a reference tool. I just want to kind of close by saying, we are very aware that this is a new requirement. It is one more thing to consider when identifying the best source of funding for projects, and it certainly adds complexity to federal awards. We want to work with you to determine the best, most efficient way to support our projects in compliance. So please keep the dialogue open with us. I think the most difficult part, and what we are actively discussing internally, is how to spot potential issues as early as possible. Right now, we're thinking that the best time to do that is through quarterly reporting, but we're certainly open to your ideas and would love to hear from you. We're also initially, when we are at the grant agreement stage, we're working on an additional form that grantees would sign, acknowledging that they understand that their project must adhere to the BABAA law, and that there are some additional considerations that they have to think about. That is no guarantee of perfect performance, but we're trying to both signal to them on the front end and also work on a kind of work from a piece of existing paperwork or documentation that they have to provide as part of the grant administration process, so we don't have to add another process. Again, very open to hearing ideas from you all about where to flag potential issues through the process. So with that, I will thank you for attending today. Thanks to Sarah Lang for so many things, but also for putting this training together. And thank you for the work you do every day on behalf of our grantees. And I apologize again that I'm not here online with you in real time to answer questions. I'm hopeful that you will either send us questions or we can schedule a follow-up session sometime in the fall to maybe talk through some of these issues in a little bit more depth, and or Sarah may come away from this with some questions that you all have sent to her. Either way, we will do our best to get you answers throughout the process. Okay, thank you so much and be well.
Okay. So I know that was a lot of information, and still probably a lot of question marks. But as I mentioned, and as Rich mentioned, any sort of questions that you may have, about BABAA, please go ahead and put those in the chat. And I think we'll just keep an eye out for those while we move on to our next section, unless there are any urgent questions that need to be discussed at this moment. I'm just going to move, these are his slides that he went through. I'm just going to move through them here. All right, seeing that there's nothing to be discussed at this moment, I think we'll just move on to the next section with John. And yeah, please just keep adding those questions to that meeting chat.
Awesome, thank you, Sarah. And I'm sure that some of you have seen this information in some form or another. If you've been working with MBRC for a while, some others of you may have not. So I'll try not to put you to sleep. I know procurement isn't always the most exciting thing in the world, but it's always fun when you get to buy stuff. So this is basically what we're going to end up going through: 2 CFR 200. We're going to talk about full and open competition, property and equipment, records monitoring and compliance, and then again, our resources tab that we have available to everybody. All righty, so 2 CFR 200 Code of Federal Regulations. Basically, procurement actions involve the purchases of goods and services needed to support the grant award. I'm not going to go through every slide verbatim. As Sarah mentioned, you'll be getting a copy of this as well. Therefore, you can reference that and all the hyperlinks and the information that's associated with those. These regulations allow grantees to follow their own procurement procedures so long as they meet the minimum standards. So a lot of people already have their standards already defined, and most of the time I would say that they're a little bit more strict than the federal. So as long as they at least meet the federal requirements, then they can feel free to use those if they'd like. And the other thing, we see this every year, and I know we sound like a broken record, but when you have a grantee that you're working with, just please remind them that that not to proceed or commit any funds before the notice to proceed. This is a little bit more in depth than we normally go into with the grantees and things of that nature, because you all are subject matter experts as well. We want to make sure that the boundaries of how the procurement can happen. So a lot of people want to get started right away, and they can. You can start the procurement process, you just can't commit the funds. So if it's going to go out to bid or something like that, you can start that process, but the very important defining line in the sand is that they don't commit any funds. And this is a little bit about full and open competition. The biggest thing to make sure we are aware is that when we're procuring goods or services, they need to be conducted in an open and full competition, consistent with the standards of 2 CFR 200, and need to make sure that there's no unfair competitive advantage, or at least minimize the potential of that coming up, because we are stewards of federal dollars, and we need to make sure that those funds are used to the maximum potential and they're used appropriately. All solicitations, bids, quotes, for requests for proposals, things that nature should be clear and concise and an accurate description of the product or service being procured, and as detailed as you can really make it. This helps in the procurement process to make sure that you're getting what you are asking for and everything is clear and on the table. So nobody can go back later and say, oh, well, if I had known that, then I could have bid differently on the project or things of that nature. Basically, it helps you get the product you're looking for at the best possible cost to help ensure that your project or their project or your project, because you all can be grantees as well, can maximize those funds. Grantees must ensure that all pre-qualified lists of persons, firms, or products used in acquiring goods or services, you want to make sure you have enough qualified sources, again, to maximize that open and free competition. And we just talked about, or Rich just talked about BABAA, Made in America. This isn't anything really new, and it's being defined, so we won't get into that too much today, since we were talking a lot about BABAA, and as Rich mentioned, we're still waiting on the the outlines and the specifics of that plan to be disseminated to us, and then we will make sure that information is provided to you all as well. And now we'll get into types of purchasing. You've got micro purchase, small purchase, competitive sealed bids, and competitive proposals. Micro purchase and small purchase procedures, they basically, the difference with those two is basically amount level and what you have as far as requirements as to procuring those goods or services. Micro purchase threshold is $10,000. You can see the OMB memorandum that will be hyperlinked in the information that we sent you, so you can check that out. Basically, it's $10,000, and you should still get, I highly recommend, no matter what you're procuring, you get a minimum of 3 quotes if possible. We realize that depending on where you are in our region, especially up north, further you get, it might be difficult to get more than one reasonable bidder on a project. So as long as you document that, we can use that information to help you find a pathway forward. So if you only get 1 or you only get 2, don't be too discouraged. Just contact us. We'll be more than happy to help you find a way forward with that. Small purchase procedures, again, still want to make sure you get an adequate number of bids, and that goes up to 250,000. And then from there, you've got for competitive sealed bids and competitive proposals. The way those kind of work, through competitive sealed bids, publicly solicited through formal advertising, and a firm fixed contract award is the lowest responsive and reasonable bidder. So you can take the outliers out pretty much immediately. You may get somebody that way undercuts it or is just way over. That's pretty much an easy thing. It's you take your group in the middle and go from there. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the bidding process, so I don't want to bore you with that. But if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. And that's the preferred method for construction, generally referred to as a request for proposal. And competitive proposals, basically you're talking about the RFQ, request for qualifications, and that's for architectural and engineering professional services. So you can base your selection on the qualifications. Again, I would still get multiple proposals if you can. That's the best way to make sure that you're going to get the product and service that you would like, and that would work and be successful for your project. And moving on to property basics, this isn't something that always comes up, but when it does, you know, we just want to make sure that we follow the right steps and people are aware of what's going on.
John, there are just a few questions in the chat if you want to take a look before you move forward.
Thank you. Let's see here. Okay, can you define pre-qualified, pre-qualified by whom? So basically you want to make sure, and actually let me move back to that slide that make it a little bit easier so we're all looking at the same information. Oops. Okay, so whether it's micro purchase, that's for any of the procurement that you go through, pre-qualified means that they're just basically vetted, that they're eligible to bid on it. You want to make sure that the list you have, you kind of just gone through. So it's not something that we pre-qualify. It's something that you all would kind of just give a brush through and make sure they're good to go. So hopefully that answers that question. And can RFPs be used prior to beginning? Wait, be issued prior to beginning on the issue contract? So you can send out a request for proposal prior to the notice to proceed and gather that information and start the process. The defining line there would be selection of that entity. So you can go through, you can send out the RFP or RFQ depending on how you want to go about that process. However, you would not want to make a formal selection, because that would potentially be committing funds before the notice to proceed. So you can get all that information, do your due diligence, and get that process started, but you wouldn't want to have like a formal town meeting on who you're going to select or something of that nature. Looks like there was another one that popped up. The project used a specific firm for construction design and engineering under a previous non-MBRC grant. Can they continue to work with that firm if they get MBRC funds for construction or have to rebid the construction service. So this is going to be based on a case-by-case basis. You would have to make a justification for sole source, and we don't take source lightly, nor does any other federal entity for that matter. You know, again, we need to make sure it's a fair, full, and open and free competition. And you would send out the information that you have if there's a justification. You know, at the end of the day, you all are responsible for who you select for the purchases for the funds being spent. So, or not you all, but the grantees. If you are a grantee, then you all are as well. So the grantee is responsible at the end of the day, however the selection is made. And there's been very few instances where sole source has been justified, because engineering standards are engineering standards. And, you know, if there's some reason why they need to be intimately familiar with a project, then that could potentially be a sole source justification, but I haven't seen that be successful in any agency that I've worked with before, except for a very rare occasion. I take that back. There's a specific piece of equipment that's used that only one engineering firm has experience with. I've seen it work in that particular instance, but if it's just a design build or something of that nature, or previously designed and engineered facility, that usually doesn't hold muster. Alrighty. So hopefully that answers those questions. And I'll try to keep a better eye on the chats as well. Okay, back to property. So we talked about a little bit the supplies, equipment, and real property acquired under a grant vest with the grantee that purchased it. However, MBRC as a federal entity retains a residual financial interest in grant acquired property under certain circumstances. And there's a few different types of property, and this is defined in 2 CFR 200, and we kind of break it out between equipment and real property. And this is a federal guidelines that 5,000 or under, doesn't matter what it is, whether you would consider it equipment or not, or whether you label it equipment, but the federal government doesn't define it for property as equipment unless it's over $5,000. Real property is, you know, lands, including land improvement structures, excluding movable machinery and equipment. All right, and the notice of federal interest, basically when that applies, typically that's in a property acquisition or significant improvements to property, things of that nature, like if there's a brownfield or it's a little nebulous here what they consider to be significant improvements. I know that my idea of significant improvement might be a little bit different than somebody else's. So we just try to make sure that that we're all on the same page with that. And we, at MBRC, we try to find the best way for you all forward, because we want you to be successful. With the notice of federal interest, basically that gets recorded to the deed. We have language for that. So if that does come up, we can provide that to you. And that basically just gets recorded to the deed. In very rare instances, sometimes states, they may not have the ability to record to the deed. So if there's something if that situation comes up with one of the projects you were involved with, please just let us know and we can see if we can figure out a way forward. And after that, with property, you've got your SF 429A, which was on the right hand side of the screen. I apologize, it's probably a little small for you to see, but we do have it on our resources site as well, that you can take a look at that. But that basically just gives a yearly property status report that you fill out and send back into us. And we talked about equipment. Something over $5,000 considered equipment. In here, I used an excavator, for example. And after that, when you go up and over that, you know, anything over the $5,000 is considered equipment. If it's a pump or HVAC system or something like that, that would typically be considered equipment. Normally, it's standalone. So if it was an HVAC system as part of a property procurement and things of that nature, we would probably just look at doing an NFI for that, because that's not movable. So if it's some situation, we've had some HVAC equipment that had come up that was kind of temporary, that was equipment. So that's one of those interesting things that we come up with every once in a while that shows up, that we have to look at things a little bit differently. So if it's immovable part of the construction, you know, we're just going to do an NFI if it's a property, and go from it that way. It's just much easier than having you all have to keep track, do a schedule of diminished values, and keep track of that for years and years. And then after the equipment falls below $5,000, that value, that is whoever the grantee's equipment, the town's LD, whatever the grantee, the receiver of that property is at that point, $5,000 or below. Federal government doesn't consider any more interest in that, and you may dispose of it however your entity, or however the entity has procurement disposition requirements. And other considerations, it's equipment inventory every 2 years using the SF428S, which is on the right-hand side. Again, that's one of those things where if you have equipment and real property, we'll try to go with whatever makes the most sense. Sometimes we may have to do both, but we try to make sure we capture that with the least amount of effort for you all. And this is a little bit of project oversight. This kind of gets out of the actual procurement itself, but it is still part of the process. Again, we talked about being stewards of federal dollars, and we want to make sure that the funds are being spent appropriate, basically. And we already talked about the grantees being responsible for managing those federal funds. Record retention, again, it's just most entities have record retention processes and policies in place, and just basically want to make sure that we have the right information and the records available to us and whoever might be looking for them, because there is always the potential that a project could be audited, and we want to make sure that we have no issues and you all have no issues. Monitoring site visits. This is something now that things are getting a little bit easier to travel. We're going to be getting out there a bit more, checking out the projects, and it's not just I don't want you to think it's punitive in nature. It's to highlight the projects as well and kind of tell your story also. And we use a variety of techniques to make sure that you all are getting the information as well, because the other side of this is the monitoring and site visits it's an opportunity for you all to communicate with us some issues that your grantees, our grantees, you're assisting with, that they may be having issues, and some opportunity that we can kind of chat together and hammer out some details of the projects if you're having any issues at all. And compliance, again, it's not something that we have to do too often, but we want to make sure that it follows all the appropriate rules and regulations. And for some reason, if there are any findings, they can be appealed. There's always got to be an avenue to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So if there is a finding, a grantee may appeal any finding of non-compliance resulting in some sort of enforcement action. And that's really about it. I know that was a lot, and I know I have a tendency to talk pretty quickly, so I apologize for that. But if you have any questions at all, please feel free to ask. And if you think of anything later, feel free to send them to myself, Sarah. Admin is probably the best place to send them. That way we can make sure that question gets sent to the appropriate person. And thank you again for talking with us this morning.
Thanks, John. I think since we have John here live and in person, if there are any questions that you have on this topic, I feel like we can discuss them now. So feel free to go ahead and raise your hand, or put put your question in the chat. I'll just give a few seconds there to see if anyone's got any clarifying questions for John.
And now's a great time, and I love I always joke about playing well in the land of misfit toys. So if you have any of the weird, strange ones that come up, feel free to ask. And if you're not comfortable asking now, you can always hit us up later as well. But now is definitely a good time.
Okay. Seeing none, hearing none, I think we'll go ahead and move forward. At the July training, it was brought up that potentially having a project intake form could be super helpful for LDDs. So a few weeks ago, I had sent out a draft form through our constant contact to get a feedback on the form. I think I received a few comments via email, but I wanted to provide some space here Essentially the thought was, having this draft form for LDDs to then take and sort of make their own. They wanted to add questions or take away questions and sort of make it applicable to their region and their communities, but also help sort of with potential MBRC projects. And on the right there are some of the questions that are included in that form, along with, sort of the basics like where's the project, who's the project contact, that kind of stuff. And I put together questions on this form from a variety of intake forms that I've seen across our region. And thanks to Beth and Fred, who shared with us their intake forms that they've used for similar things. I definitely took some questions from both of those. So I think if there aren't any sort of major changes that, you all wish to see, then we can sort of say that this form is the final form, if you will. But, it's ultimately just a template for you all to use moving forward if you want to, really collect some detailed information on potential MBRC projects, or really, any kind of projects that you might be helping with. You can use the form and make it your own. And I can send out sort of a final draft of that for you all to use. I wanted to, open up. I think having these listening sessions are important to do every session. So we're always going to make a little time to just hear from you guys, on if there are specific topics for future trainings that you really want us to cover, any ongoing challenges or opportunities. Was, sharing the LOIs super helpful for you all. Any kind of feedback or information you want to share with us, we're happy to hear. I believe Sarah, you were wanting to chime in quickly here. Why don't you go for it?
I just wanted to put a plug into the LDDs present today. If you are already in communication with our 2023 grantees through the Catalyst program, it would be super helpful if you could just put a plug into them to get their forms submitted. These forms are in part of the revised process that we put in place. I think Andrea reviewed this at our last meeting. The intent is to get the LDDs on board sooner in the grant process. So these forms that we're requesting will help us do that. We've got some states are really proactive in getting these forms in, and others are lagging behind. Today is the deadline that we put in the award letter for getting these forms in, and we've got maybe half of them in. So if you're in contact with them already, just a quick email or a phone call to plug getting those forms in so that we can get their project started that much more quickly and get you all engaged in assisting with the grantees. That would be super helpful.
Thanks, Sarah. Yes, get in those forms. We have a question from Tracy. Thanks, Tracy. They're asking, what is MBRC's process to inform the designated LDD of which awardee they will be assisting? I see in New Hampshire, there are 25 awardees, but it's unclear which awardee will be assigned to which LDD. So the relationship between the grantee and the LDD is really on the grantee to form. I'd say generally speaking, each project is within a service area of one LDD. However, there are cases where LDD service areas do overlap. So ultimately, it's really up to the grantee to reach out to the LDD. As you all know, projects for Catalyst are required to use an LDD unless there was an LDD waiver approved. And so if if you haven't gotten any outreach from grantees, you're also welcome to reach out to those in your service area. But ultimately, it is really the grantee, up to the grantee to make that connection. And I will say we do, multiple times along the way in the process, remind them, reach out to your LDD, make sure you're getting that contract. So I know that's not sort of a clear answer, Tracy, but ultimately it does come down to the grantee because it is a requirement of the Catalyst program to have a contract with an LDD. But you have that list, you've seen the list of awards, so you are totally welcome to reach out to those projects that are in your service area to see if they need assistance or if you could set up a contract. There's no harm in doing that. So hopefully that answers your question. Ben, it looks like
Sarah,
you would be
if I could just add that this
Sure.
year we also CC'd the primary
Yes.
contact of the LDD on the award email. So you should have, or someone in your organization should have been copied on those award emails. So that's another sort of thing
Great.
we're trying to do to get you all looped in earlier.
Perfect. Yep, I had forgotten about that. So any of those emails that you were CC'd on are, generally those are the projects that you should be connecting with. When grantees apply, and Sarah, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure when grantees apply, they do, one of the questions is selecting what LDD services their area. And so that's typically what we used when CCing LDDs in those award letters. So check with other people in your organization. Typically, it's the executive director that is the contact that we use, unless you've notified us to use someone else. So just be sure to check with them to see where those emails ended up. Ben would be interested in MBRC hosting a forum style event with case studies of FEP. Awesome. I think that's a great idea. I will bring that to Marina. I'm sure she would be glad to host something like that. Speaking of, Marina just got married a few days ago, which is awesome. And we look forward to having her back after her honeymoon. Elizabeth, just to reinforce, a grant recipient has to utilize LDD to LDD, the grantee cannot do it themselves. We do have an LDD waiver process. And Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, but that waiver has to be approved prior to getting an award. So if they did not get an LDD waiver at this point, then they are required to contract with an LDD for grant administration. Does that sound correct, Sarah?
Yeah, I would say the exception is state applicants.
Yes.
Do not have to have an LDD. And there had some discussion this week. If the grantee is an LDD, we're not expecting you to contract with an outside LDD. So that I think needs to be a little bit clearer in our program manual, but that's also, it almost seems like it's self-evident, but just to be clear, if you're an LDD, you don't need to get another LDD to manage your grant.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks for bringing that up.
We should also clarify that's for Catalyst projects.
Yes.
Staff projects don't use LDDs at the time.
Yeah, FEP projects are not required to use an LDD, but they can if they choose to. All right, anything else on this? And again, we're always open to feedback or suggestions on future trainings. Anything that might come to mind, you can always send them directly to me, to my email, or even the admin at mbrc.gov email. So, if you don't think of anything right now, but you do later, please do send it our way.
Actually, Sarah, I thought of one thing. I don't know if we have any state partners on here. I'm not sure if it's just LDDs or we actually have any state folks as well. But as far as the procurement, just so everybody is aware, the state folks, so that means official state, not a town or municipality or something like that. But the state folks follow their procurement procedures, not the federal. So they still typically align, but as far as the federal procurement standards go, the states themselves, so if it's like state of Vermont or, New York, whatever, they follow state adopted procurement procedures. So just want to make sure if there are any state partners on this call that they are aware of that.
Great. Thank you. Here's slides with some helpful hints. They are the same as what was presented in the July training, so I'm not going to go into depth. You can take a look at them when you receive the slide deck. It's nice to just even save this individual slide to have quickly on hand. And then, of course, our resources. We are, over the past calendar year, have really been trying to update and provide more resources, around tutorials of how to file reimbursements or fill out a SF-270 or some of the other federal forms. So again, if there are any suggestions on tutorials or resources that you think would be super helpful for you or for your grantees, please don't hesitate to ask for us to put something together for you all. But again, you can reference the slide, save it for later. And we can, if there's anything you think we should add to our resources, don't hesitate to reach out. Just want to say thank you. We really appreciate, having your help and being in partnership with our LDDs. We do really feel like you all are critical to the capacity of our Northern Border region. And so, we really want to help you all sort of stay up to date on the happenings and requirements, and, are always open to suggestions on how we can do that better, and, help you all along the way. So I'm going to just stop sharing. Looks like we got in just under an hour, but happy to stay on for a few minutes. If anyone has any follow-up questions, happy to answer those. And I will be sending out recording of this along with the slides. And it sounds like there were some people who did not receive the July slides and recording, so I'll go ahead and also share those when I send out stuff from today. So want to just open the floor. Happy to answer any questions, concerns, weekend plans. We have a whole hour to do something else this morning. So, oh, dog sitting. That can be fun or not fun, depending on the dog. Tracy, can you talk about design build? John, I believe that's you.
Sure. Yeah, I can take that on.
Also, feel free if anyone needs to hop off or wants to hop off. No need to stay, but we'll continue to be on here for a few minutes to answer questions.
Sounds good. So design build, it can be allowed in some instances. It's tough because we prefer a firm fixed. If there's a way to incorporate that into that process, then possibly. I know the Army Corps likes to do a lot of design build things. It's can be beneficial in certain instances. It's tough. So it gets it tough sometimes to actually get a proper bid when it is a design build. But there is potential. I can't say that I would rule it out entirely. So I'm not sure if that really answers your question or if that was a little too ambiguous. So feel free to reach out if there's a particular specific instance that you're referring to, and we might be able to figure out a way forward.
Thanks, John. Anything else? Davis-Bacon.
So that is correct. MBRC does not require by legislation for Davis-Bacon. However, if there is another federal partner in the project that does require it, then that by nature makes the entire project susceptible to Davis-Bacon. Hopefully that answers your question.
And I just wanted to touch on, I'm not sure if the dates have been shared yet for the new grantee trainings. But I'll share them briefly now. And if they haven't been shared, they will definitely be shared. For New York, it is Tuesday, the 26th, 10 to 12:30. For Maine, it is Wednesday, the 27th, 10 to 12:30. For Vermont, Thursday, September 28th, 12:30 to 3. And then last but not least, for New Hampshire, Friday, the 29th, 10 to 12:30. Fred.
Hi, I apologize if this was covered in July, but are there NEPA processes already in place that if the applicant went through them, it doesn't have to be repeated by NBRC?
I can take that one. So as a federal entity, if there's another federal entity that has already gone through the NEPA process, you still need to go through the NBRC process. And by that, I mean, if we can, if it's an option to us, we will try to adopt the other federal agencies' NEPA process. It would still require, you to fill out some of the forms and things of that nature, and it would require our contractors, our TCG group, the folks we have selected to help us with NEPA. It would take their review of that process to see if it is possible that we could adopt that. But we don't want to make you do it twice. So if there is a way that we can justify it and it works for the entire project as a whole, then we will try to do our best to adopt that.
Great, thank you.
All right, well, happy to stay on another minute or two, but to answer any questions, but thank you all so much for coming. You will be notified of our December training once we have a date selected for that. But we look forward to seeing you there. Sarah, we have someone asking if they can attend a different session if they can't attend their respective state for the new grantee training.
No problem at all. And just pop an email into the admin at NBRC email address, and Adrian will be in touch with you regarding the other dates and the links to those other sessions.
Yeah, it's my understanding it's pretty much the same presentation, but because there are so many people, we try and just have smaller trainings so that we can answer questions accordingly. All right, well, thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend, and I'm sure we'll be talking soon. Thanks, everyone.